Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I am one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me to discuss Secret Invasion Episode 1, Resurrection, is Stephen Tolafield and Mark Zaid, who's been busy. Mark, how you doing?
I am doing well, and I'm glad there's a new Marvel series finally. It feels like it's been too long since the last one.
Yeah, they went from having too much in a too short a period of time to a giant window. I think if we get to like two a year, I think that would be like the right, that's off schedule from the movies. That would make me happy. But with that said, Stephen, it's been, I don't know, what, 48 hours, 56 since we
Yeah,
saw each other last. How you
yeah,
doing?
it's been great. I'm doing really well. I was actually a fan of the Agents of Shield show. At least I think I kind of dropped off the last season. I didn't quite watch that, but I like getting back to the vibe of the agents and seeing what they're up to. It seems like a fun territory to get back engaged with.
This felt like what Agents of Shield should have been the
Yeah.
entire time, and also what Falcon and Winter Soldier could have been as well. Because this out of the gate felt very Cold War spy story, and it was like, this is fantastic. Uh, I want to raise the one fear I had with it, and I'm still nervous about it with how they walk the line. The Skrulls are refugees. And, in today's political climate, there are those who equate refugees either with they're all criminals or they're a threat to the country. And I don't agree with either of those. And I'm very nervous when we have a show that takes refugees and now a segment of them are terrorists. That premise makes me nervous. And hopefully they walk the line with it, but I was very concerned about that. Did either of you have that reaction?
Yeah, I think it's a very dicey area to get into, especially with the motivation or the radicalization, the motivation for the radicalization being getting a new home, which resonates in a lot of terrorist organizations in throughout the world. And so I think there's a lot of sensitivities around that are potentially easily inflamed by this kind of setting. So I'm curious to see how they proceed.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that context, though I very clearly see what you're referring to. I have been very intrigued by how the Marvel Universe and Disney has dealt with the Skrulls to begin with, because one, I never watched Agents of Shield, not that the Skrulls have anything to do with it, but I didn't watch the television show. So most of my Marvel television movie knowledge is from the Disney Plus series and of course the Marvel movies. But from my comic book standpoint, the other thing that's kind of caused me a little bit of problem for some of this, I come at so much of this new because my comic history is old comic world history. When I lecture on comics, I'm talking about the origins of American comics in the 19th century. And I pretty much stopped for when I went to college in the mid 80s. So much of what is being used in the Marvel series, Disney series, Marvel movies is more recent. So I don't necessarily know some of the characters, but the Skrulls I knew because they were from Fantastic Four #2. When they invaded the Earth, and the FF which is not really part of the Marvel universe yet, obviously, because of licensing issues, etc. Other than what we saw in the Doctor Strange, Richard Reed overlap, that was it. But they invaded. The FF defeated them and then left them as cows. But they were enemies throughout the FF universe. I'm sure there was some issues I don't recall where there was a friendly Skrull like Talos, but as a species, they were enemies from the get-go. There was the Super Skrull who had all the powers of the Fantastic Four and everything. So when Captain Marvel came about, I was kind of thrown for a loop that the Skrulls were good guys, other than what they were portrayed in the very beginning, which was misleading. So as I was watching this first episode, and now you've got me thinking, Josh, because I see what you're talking about. The thing that got me the most of, wow, how are they going to pull this off, was any time when I see in these movies, especially superhero movies, where we, the Americans, and whomever the superheroes or supervillains are operating in a foreign country, and yet there's like no foreign nationals involved whatsoever, right? I don't think there was like one primary Russian character. They all turned out to be Skrulls, right? All of this going on in and around Moscow and elsewhere, and yet you see no Russian police, no Russian officials, no Russian spy agency. It's MI6 and we don't know if it's SHIELD or who in the US government, because we'll talk about that. But all of these major events, and yet it's as if the Russians are absent, which is clearly not how it would be. And as we talk about terrorist activity, there's a lot of times when we would cooperate, even with Russia, when we were dealing with fighting terrorists, because usually it was a common enemy. So that was striking me throughout. I'm like, really? Where are the Russians? Fury's walking around the city in the dark as an African-American man. And as it was said, you're going to stand out, because I've been to Moscow, and yeah, that's true. And yeah, he does get kidnapped, but of course it's by the British, not by the Russians.
Yeah, this is not like the last season of Jack Ryan, which has Russian intelligence services in play, both good and bad. Granted, this is episode 1, and after the way this episode ends, we'll probably see the Russian forces taking an active role after episode 1. At least I would be shocked if they didn't. Especially was Unity Day a Russian holiday that I had never heard of before? Because it's like when they said Unity Day, it's like, for who?
Not for Ukraine. I don't know what Unity Day was referring to. We'll have to Google it to see if it's real.
Yeah, it's just,
I presume, I mean, I know they always make stuff up, but something like that big, you'd think they could easily just find a Russian holiday that's real. So I assume there's something about it.
yeah, it's just, we can do the research. So that's just the theme out of the gate. Now we get reintroduced Agent Ross, and my question is, who does he work for now? Because the last time we saw him, he had been arrested by his ex-wife and the US government because he shared information with the Wakandan Queen, and this is in the Wakanda Forever film. And after getting arrested, the Wakandans free him. They rescue him from a prison transport. So this is, I believe this is supposed to be after Wakanda Forever, raising the issue of, who does he work for? Did he get a pardon? Like, what's going on here? And I mean, going just with the Black Panther side of it, I don't think that's a crime that, for what he did, that would end in, I was trying to stop a global war and I get arrested for it. So there's that factor, but it's just out of the gate, who is he supposed to be working for?
Yeah, I think it's open to interpretation, but my perception of it was that the agent that was reaching out to him, what was the name of that agent? Prescott, yeah, the Pepe Sylvia conspiracy theorist guy. He might not have known that that Ross had been arrested and was out of the game, and that the Skrull had just stolen his identity. And so that wasn't Ross at all. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, so this is taking place in November of 2025, according to articles I read online in trying to figure out the timeline of everything, because timeline is important. Now, I also looked, Unity Day is a real thing, and it actually fits perfectly. It is held on November 4th. It is a national holiday in Russia, commemorates the popular uprising which expelled Polish-Lithuanian, which is both of where my grandparents were from, occupation forces from Moscow in 1612. Now, I don't remember, maybe you guys do, when the Wakandan situation with Ross took place in the timeline, because that point, Stephen, is really valid and I was trying to figure out what the heck is going on with Prescott? What operation is this representing? Now, we know it's not Ross because it's a Skrull, but you would have thought if it came after Black Panther 2, right? That whether this is SHIELD, the remnants of it, or some other intelligence agency, that everybody would know. And the thing that was throwing me off is on Prescott is, here he is. He says he's basically off the grid because he can't trust anyone for whatever reason. Because I don't know if this is a character that's ever appeared before. This is the only time I've ever seen him. So we have no basis of knowing why all of a sudden are you this paranoid. What led you to believe that? But here it is. He's operating in Moscow in a very unsecured location. The Skrull, being Ross, just kind of walks in. There doesn't appear to be any type of surveillance apparatus anywhere. He's got what would be, if this guy is legitimately working for a U.S. intelligence agency, tons of classified information just hanging up all over the walls and everywhere. And, he's retrieving sensitive information about this heist that the Skrulls perpetrated that no one else knows of except for him and the Skrulls, for the most part. So what network is he tied into? Who's he operating? I mean, none of this is answered. And of course, for all of these folks, all I'm thinking from my line of work is, what is their status in Russia? Do they have diplomatic immunity? Are they on official orders of the U.S. government? What would happen if they got caught by the Russians while they were there? What authority do they have to engage in, also police work overseas, which the spy agencies would not have, and military action and kill people, whether aliens or non-aliens, on foreign soil, on Russian soil? I mean, so many legal and policy questions I have about this episode.
To go back to the timeline, Wakanda Forever is supposed to be a year and a couple months after Endgame. So Endgame's was 5 years after Infinity War. So that's what, 2022 or 2023. So Wakanda Forever should be a year before Secret Invasion, timeline wise. So that raises all kinds of, does he know? Does Prescott know? And how does, again, who does Ross work for? Who did, which goes to the question, who does Prescott work for? Because if this is, after Winter Soldier and the Agents of SHIELD series, SHIELD's disbanded. And I took issue with Agents of SHIELD because the US government didn't fall. So the fact that they operate rogue for several years is asinine. So it's one thing to go, we just had something horrible happen. We now need to regroup. Okay, so like 80% of our staff turned out to be neo-Nazis. That's bad. We got to do better background checks, fix that. And what replaces it? Is it Saber, or is Saber supposed to be space and SHIELD supposed to be the planetary domestic threats? Because that makes sense from the comics, but we've never in the films had a definitive answer of what happened to Shield, or if it's been restarted. And the role of Ross and Prescott strongly hint that it's an intelligence service at play, but what one? And I mean, in the comics, Shield goes through several changes from it's a US agency to an international agency. Like, are they doing similar gamesmanship here? And at the end of the day, does it just matter? Are we lawyers freaking out, wanting to know the status? And like, and this is 2 minutes in that we are hung up on this. Stephen, you raised the issue of false impersonation. Could you take that on, please?
Yeah, I was just going to note the whole series is probably going to be one long prosecutor's dream for 18 USC 913 prosecutions, which is the federal statute that prohibits the impersonation of a federal officer. And so all the Skrull who assume the identity of a federal officer violating this federal statute, it comes with a fine and an imprisonment to impersonate someone. And so it's either if you use the identity to arrest or search someone, for sure, but it also prohibits just acting like an agent or an officer. So they're certainly doing that. They're probably, if they survive, they're going to be prosecuted probably. And I guess, but they haven't done it on U.S. soil, so they would have to do it, I guess, in the U.S. for the.
I don't know. I didn't look at 913, but a lot of our statutes, we do have
Nice. Okay.
jurisdictional ability to, especially if it impacts U.S. nationals, extraterritorial application under either national jurisdiction, meaning our nationals, or universal jurisdiction for some offenses, for some of the murder offenses. I mean, we have statutes on the book to deal with murder against U.S. nationals overseas or committed by U.S. nationals overseas. It doesn't matter where it was. I kind of going back to what we were saying, Fury leaves Sabra, and at least by the scene where Rhodey is talking to the president of the United States, Fury was clearly up there. I don't want to say clearly, appeared to be up there under the authority of the U.S. government, something sanctioned, but his leaving was not. And his operation and everything that has so far taken place in the one full episode, we'll see how the rest of the other 5 go. It is outside of U.S. authority. He's rogue. He's gone rogue yet again, which we keep seeing as a common theme within these Marvel movies and stories. It was said that he was AWOL, absent without leave, which is more of a military term, and Fury is no longer Sergeant Fury as he started in the comic books. But I mean, in my civilian federal practice, we sometimes use AWOL as well. But essentially, he's insubordinate, is what it appears to be, and he's totally working off the books. As is Agent Ross, who I guess doesn't really matter because she gets killed. Supposedly, I suppose. Not sure if we actually saw her die, so maybe she doesn't. She gets shot.
Agent Hill.
Hill, not Ross. Hill, sorry. But all these people, it goes back to what we were saying before. What legal authority are you operating under overseas? And we can. There was an Office of Legal Counsel memo written back in 1989, because I helped secure the release of it, that said FBI agents can operate lawfully overseas, even where it's a crime to do so in that country, meaning under U.S. law, it's legal for them to operate overseas. If they get caught doing something, in that foreign country, they could be prosecuted, but they're not breaking U.S. law. But, so far, everyone we've seen in this episode don't seem to be, one, they can be arrested and prosecuted by the Russians, 2, can be arrested and prosecuted by the U.S. Well, and the British too, given some of what Fury did, like bugging the MI6 headquarters or station, I should say, in Moscow.
Yeah, but that's it goes to our special relationship with the Brits. They'll get over it. So yeah, again, so again, Hill, Fury, Talos, what are they operating under? It is so, I mean, this abuses the necessity defense. I mean, there are too many series that rely on, well, since the government was compromised, we had to break all the laws in order to do it. And it's one thing if that happens every decade, but Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that was kind of the staple of the story. And it's used a lot. That, I mean, even Star Trek Picard had it for season 3 with changelings. So again, it's the shapeshifters coming in, compromising a government. Since you don't know who to trust, it's now okay for everyone to go rogue. Now, one of the things that I'm curious about is Rhodey. One of the ideas for Endgame was that he would be the vice president of the United States. And I'm wondering if they're going there, or if he's just like Secretary of Defense or some other high-level cabinet position, that he's hanging out with the president and giving the president a quick briefing on Nick Fury. So I'm curious to see what Rhodey's actual position is. Because if he's Veep, that's cool. I would hope he doesn't suit up, because we wouldn't want the Veep putting on battle armor and going in. Sure, it'd be great campaign ads, but it's just continuity of government. Bad plan. So, which raises the issue of, Mark, you bring up Five Eyes. What is that?
Well, the relationship between Fury and his counterpart, essentially from MI6, which is the British equivalent of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was interesting. Now, there's a history there that I don't know of, because it's in the comic series, apparently, that I haven't read. So this was new to me. But, you know, one, it was interesting, of course, that MI6 kidnaps Fury. Not quite sure why they needed to kidnap him in order to get him to come speak with them, but that's a crime right there under Russian law for sure, and under U.S. law, quite frankly, probably under British law. But Five Eyes, which some of our listeners may know from the current Trump prosecution, because some of the documents confiscated down in Mar-a-Lago were marked Five Eyes. And that means these are documents or information that is shared only within 5 countries: the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Ireland. These are our closest relationships. We are not allowed to spy, conduct espionage activities against these countries, nor they against us. You know, just because we are allies with countries doesn't mean we don't spy on them or they spy on us. Like Israel spies on us all the time, South Korea, Taiwan. But those countries, those 5 or 4 others beyond us, no, we don't do that. And we typically will share almost everything. I mean, I'm sure there are things, obviously, we don't share, but we typically share, certainly more so than anybody else. So that was why MI6 knew of the spaceship that Fury was on with the Skrulls. But it was interesting to highlight that when he asked her about the weapons heist that the Skrulls did, she played dumb. And he said, well, I can't tell who a Skrull is, but I can tell when a human is lying. But she threw it right back in his face by, hey, you're clearly not who you used to be, Fury, because you wouldn't have to ask me about this. You would already know it through your own intelligence apparatus, which again goes back to what we were talking about before of what the heck is Fury? Who is he working for? And what is he operating, what authorities is he operating under? Because it shows that MI6 apparently knows a whole bunch more about what's going on than the US does, or at least Fury does. And then he bugs their office, MI6's headquarters in Moscow, which would cause incredibly problematic aspects within our relationship, much in the same way when Ed Snowden revealed that we were listening in to Angela Merkel, the German chancellor's cell phone conversations. And that was because they're not part of the Five Eyes, and it made sense to do, but it harmed the relationship. So there's not everything has to be legal per se, that we're identifying as problems. A lot of it is problematic to the relationships that exist between countries. So that was a very strange scene to add into the further discussion of all that we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, I mean, again, I do love that actress. She's been in many solid BBC shows. And when they were casting the 13th Doctor, she made the comment like, why didn't anyone think of me? So she's just sassy sense of humor, very, very good. And it's nice to see her in a Marvel show. But yeah, I had the same reaction of, where were the Americans? like are they just hitting the snooze button? Like, why aren't they doing anything in Moscow? Because you think they would notice Fury, and especially if the president's just ordered find him, you think they would keeping what's going on as well.
Yeah, I mean, MI6 figures out, but the CIA station in Moscow, which is a very sizable station by way of persons, isn't aware that Nick Fury and Agent Hill and supposedly Ross, even though it's not him, but are operating in Moscow. It doesn't make sense.
I wonder if some of it can be rationalized by just the fact that all these people were blipped out, and they maybe like the institutions that they belong to sort of eroded in ways that they just sort of spun off into these sort of unsupervised little spheres of influence. But I don't know. Yeah, those are great questions.
Well, it's like how much of this is just post blip politics changed?
Yeah.
Different countries might have come out better. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine British intelligence being in a better place than US intelligence, but could happen. That did most of the US spies get snapped, and then when they came back, they're very out of date and don't know what's going on. So they're still rebuilding. So I don't know. But I do know that Fury and Talos end up going after a art dealer that turns out to be a Skrull that gave nuclear dirty bombs to, what was it, Talos's daughter, was it Gaia?
Yeah.
So that's a fist fight between Talos and the art dealer. Talos clearly doesn't want to be killing Skrulls. And in part of the fight, Fury shoots the Skrull. And it really upsets Talos with, that was my fight. Was Fury legally justified to use lethal force? And Stephen, why don't you take the first crack at this?
Lethal force is usually reserved for situations where someone is going to be seriously injured or killed, if you're defending someone else. So I guess if the violence between them was escalating in ways that it seemed like Talos was in some pretty serious trouble. So I would argue that Fury was probably justified in ending the aggressor's ability to harm Talos.
Mark, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's correct, right? You can use it in the defense of yourself or defense of others if if there is a fear of serious bodily harm or death. I kept getting struck by the fact of, I mean, here these guys were, the Skrulls clearly have greater strength than we do and greater physical ability. And they're, they're throwing each other around in ways that would just crack our skulls open. And then just like a bullet takes them out. I just didn't quite understand that. But I mean, I guess that's for the physicists to discuss in doctors' podcasts of Marvel movies and series than the lawyers to do. So yes, legally defensible, though. In Russia, I don't know. We'd have to look at the Soviet/Russian legal code to see if there is a self-defense. That may be a minimum sentence in the gulag, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Fury using armor-piercing bullets of some kind, so maybe that was, to pierce the thick skin of a Skrull who's clearly stronger, and they live longer since Talos is like 140 or something, triple digits, which is still middle age for a Skrull. But I don't know if they're, those two were locked into mutual combat. I don't know if it crossed into the threat of lethal force being used, which would have justified Fury. So I'm a little on the fence. And I'm normally the Hawk. So the fact that I'm very uncomfortable with Fury taking the kill shot, I think speaks volumes. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I
Getting
would have.
soft.
I'm just gonna soft and liberal, not wanting lethal force to be used all the time, but I would have preferred non-lethal force because Talos was really upset that like he didn't want to kill a member of his own species.
What was that? I thought it was just because he wanted to take him out himself, or maybe not kill him, but I think I only watched that scene once, but my sense was in that one time was he was just upset that Fury didn't let him deal with it. Not that he didn't want to potentially kill, although killing him obviously didn't make much sense because you can't extract information from him. And they were still inquiring about what was going on with, why were they meeting? Who was he supposed to meet with, if I recall?
Yeah, and you could find out what kind of weapon it was. Like there's lots of good reasons to not shoot. And clearly with all the toys that Furies has in his disposal, you think there would be an energy weapon taser of some kind that could incapacitate a enhanced individual and subdue them. So again, Fury is supposed to be the, other side of the coin to Captain America, where Cap doesn't like killing and Fury doesn't have a problem with it. And maybe that's what they're going with here, but it actually bothered me a lot, which raises the issue of how long does it take to find an habitable planet for the Skrulls, who are radiation resistant? I mean, I know it's hard finding planets in the Goldilocks zone, but Captain Marvel's pretty fast. Why haven't they found a home for the Skrulls to go to?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 30 years, right? And Fury was only gone for 5 of those, but granted, he had some other things on his plate, I guess. Yeah.
Presumably the Skrulls were gone for 5 too,
That's
right? I
true.
mean,
Yeah,
every
of them.
creature was impacted by the blip. They made it sound like, yeah, okay, we'll give you that extra 5 years because you weren't around, but neither were you guys.
Right.
You're not immune from it. That didn't make any sense to me about the 30 years, because that was 1995 when the Skrulls first came into play. And I also want to know where the heck is Fury's eye patch, because we saw what the Flurkin did to him. And I think this is the first time I've ever, other than in the movie when the Flurkin slashed him, he's never shown the scar. That's just weird. Never shown the scratches that I remember, at least not in the major movies. And do you know different, Josh?
Winter Soldier.
Did he have it? Not did he not have it? I'm not forgetting. I'm
He
not
took-
remembering.
He took it off to get access
Oh,
to
yeah.
the computer when he was having the showdown with Pierce. And he says something to the effect of you have to keep an eye out or something like that. And that's when he moves the eye patch so you could see what it looks like. Other than that, it's always been covered up. And Fury without the eye patch is a little weird. However, trying to blend in, what if is the tall African American man in Moscow already going to get attention? Would the eye patch call even more attention? So I don't know the answer to that. But maybe he's just trying to fit in more. And have the scratched eye visible. So
I mean, I always thought or understood that the eye didn't work any longer. I didn't look very closely to see whether his eye that eye was moving around when looking, but like I thought that was the reason for the eye patch, but I don't know.
the comics, I mean, it goes back to Sergeant Fury where it's like grenade shrapnel takes out the left eye.
Grenades, flirkins,
Yeah.
not that much difference.
Well, then and again, the comment in Winter Soldier about last time last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye. It's like, so that was about the cat. You're playing with the cat, and that was the thing that took out your eye. Okay. It's just that continuity of explaining what's what.
Just a quick Google search turned up a quote from Samuel Jackson saying that he just doesn't wear the patch anymore. He views it as indicating some vulnerability, and now he's just decided he's not going to wear that badge anymore.
So Samuel L. Jackson, in his own mind and creation, has just redone a character that's been around for almost 60 years because he doesn't feel like it.
Well, I'm sure was done in consultation with the designers of the show, but yes, that's his justification as quoted in Vanity Fair.
It's like wanting the purple lightsaber.
Yeah.
And have you guys seen the exchange with George Lucas about getting purple? It's good because he's chatting with Lucas in costume. And he said like, "Oh, can I get a purple lightsaber?" And he's like, "Well, good guys are supposed to be green or blue." He's like, "So why not purple?" And Lucas kind of acquiesces and goes, "Maybe you could have purple." And and then Jackson just has this giant grin on his face. So it's just, I mean, the man's a nerd. I appreciate him. I don't remember Fury in the comics, besides Sergeant Fury, going without the eye patch, though. So, but again, it was a different injury. So maybe that's what they're going to stand on. Since we have terrorism in play. And so just with everything happening with Russia in real life right now, from the weekend not being a news-free weekend to Ukraine, like they're in the news. So the idea of a Americans Against Russia group, I mean, like we are doing our part to make sure Russia doesn't roll over Ukraine. Like this clearly was written before, like they didn't change course during the war. So that's a thing. And raises the opportunity to discuss terrorism. So this goes to US code, but acts of terrorism transcending national boundaries gets into what are prohibited acts. And I'm not going to read every part of 18 USCS section 2332B because it's quite meaty, but you have to have someone who's conducting or involved in conduct transcending national boundaries and in a circumstance described in subsection B, where they kill, kidnap, maim, commits an assault and serious bodily injury, or assaults with a dangerous weapon any person within the United States. Okay, we're in Russia, so move away from that one. Or creates a substantial risk of serious bodily injury to any other person by destroying or damaging any structure, conveyance or real property or personal property within the United States. Okay, so like this is all US based, but there's gotta be Russian equivalents because no one likes terrorism taking place in their nations. It's like after 9/11, allied countries were like, what help do you need? Like no one was okay with the 3,000 people who died in our country in a horrific way. People rallied.
Well, and there are other provisions in 23, 32 and beyond, up through, I think, like 23, 38, 39, because I've worked with some of these statutes before that do allow extraterritorial jurisdiction of the US. And we've prosecuted a number of terrorists who actually had no connection to the United States whatsoever, because of certain things that they did overseas, where there might have been, for example, an American on board the plane, or it was an American owned plane, etc. Fawaz Yunus, I think, was one of the early ones in the late 1980s, 89 or so. And a lot of these statutes actually predate 9/11. They have nothing to do with it, because some of them came into play with Pan Am 103, which I worked on, the terrorist bombing of over Lockerbie in 1988. But one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. That's always the problem with the definitions or trying to define terrorism. It's more about the act than what the motive is, although terrorism is basically this notion of trying to engage in an act that has political influence. It kind of goes to what you mentioned in the very beginning, Josh, about these folks being refugees. And there's huge gaps in this storyline that at least I don't know, because maybe it's explained in the comic series, of the notion of why and what has led these groups of Skrulls to become so extremist. Now there's a little bit explained, they're annoyed it's taking so long, but where are all the other Skrulls? And okay, they're hidden within US society, or not US, Earth society, from the general population, but clearly governments know about them. So why haven't we incorporated them in some society or all the societies to give them asylum until we can figure out what to do with them if in fact they want to leave? So it's a very interesting storyline of is this terrorism, is it not, for what their motives are, but clearly it's making it sort of appear as if you've got Talos, the only good Skrull left, at least from what we get down the storyline, his daughter, who's borderline, back and forth because she didn't know her mom had been murdered by apparently the Skrull she's working for. And then every other Skrull who's a bad Skrull. So that seems like an act of war against the United States, clearly Russia, because they bomb the Russians. Fascinating, this American group, supposedly American group against Russia, which it seems to be is a real group in the storyline, because the Skrulls are kidnapping the Americans who are engaged in the group and impersonating them, going back to what Stephen was talking about, not only impersonating them, but taking their mind, I guess their memory, which I don't remember the Skrulls being able to do that before. That was a new one on me, but maybe you guys know differently. So torturing these Americans, it's hard to tell, are they killing them or not? They seem to be put in some sort of status, suspended animation, not sure for what purpose. Maybe we'll learn that as the series goes along, but a whole host of legal violations under international law and various national laws, as they're supposedly the one scene where Talos and Fury are talking, that maybe this is meant to create a war between Russia and the United States. I'm not quite sure what that gets the Skrulls, quite frankly, but that seems to be the storyline.
Yeah, and saying that don't worry, radiation doesn't harm us. The kinetic effect of a nuclear bomb should. Like the superheat should vaporize them just the same. You know, whether you're living in the remnants of a nuclear reactor, it still goes boom. Now I didn't care for the Secret Invasion comic, and I'll try to give a brief overview of they're just using the name. So in the comic, the issue is after, I don't remember if it's Kree-Skrull War or some event where the Skrulls make a play on Earth, the Illuminati, so it's Reed Richards, Submariner, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, I'm forgetting Black Bolt, and I know I'm forgetting somebody. They go to the Skrull homeworld and say, don't mess with us. And that goes badly. And so they end up getting kidnapped and cloned and escape, but the clones don't, and they don't know about the clones. And the clones are used to figure out a way to, how do we take down Earth? So when they do that, you have a Skrull princess who's like leading the charge. And so you have all these Skrulls going deep cover. And the princess takes on the role of Spider-Woman. So the entire Great Spider-Woman miniseries that ran, turns out wasn't Spider-Woman, it was a Skrull. And so that was kind of obnoxious. The Fury is is smarter than everyone else. He's the one that figures it out, and he's underground. So he's like ex-agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And you have S.H.I.E.L.D. getting infiltrated by Skrulls, and different heroes are replaced, like Hank Pym is replaced, and things are going sideways because of that. The best arc was the miniseries with Thor and Beta Ray Bill, where New Asgard, which is floating over Oklahoma, gets sieged. And that entire battle is awesome with how everything goes down with that one. But the rest of it, the fight in Central Park, and it just, it ends with Norman Osborn being viewed as the hero, and he takes over S.H.I.E.L.D., which renames it Hammer, and that's what gets into the Dark Avengers storyline. So there was, it didn't work for me. Other parts would have worked better. So all of that said, they're just using the name. So like heroes were kidnapped, kept in stasis, and that way they could figure out best ways to impersonate them. But yeah, I'm like a House of M, happens, and you have Skrulls in deep cover who then see Earth change because of Wanda. So yeah, there's just a ton there. All of that said, here we go. So yeah, problematic and weird.
I mean, I guess we'll see as the rest of the series plays itself out if it's just what you think. It's just a taking of the name and some overlap rather than the storyline. I'm just going back to the notion of, that the radiation doesn't impact them and they're in some obscure place. I don't think it was actually identified per se that I can remember, but I'm thinking, if the Russians knew of Skrulls, I assume the Russians know. We don't have any evidence yet that they do know of the existence of Skrulls, but give them Chernobyl.
Yeah.
The Russians would want the Skrulls there if they could make them, allies of Russia. You got a city full of radiation that nobody can use. So there you go, Skrulls. New Skrull City is now Chernobyl, is what Chernobyl was, but
But it also raises the point of being refugees post Infinity War and definitely post Endgame. Actually post 2012 with the Battle of New York, humanity gets introduced. There's hostile alien species. After any one of those would have been a good time to go like, by the way, we got some refugees because we're the good guys, and these individuals were getting hunted by the Kree. They've been living here, they can shapeshift. They don't have to shapeshift anymore. Welcome to Tulsa or Berkeley or Salt Lake City. Like pick a place where, and now you have green people with pointy ears and they can be on their own skin. Like that would have made more sense, at least for the refugees, so they could fit in and adapt. You have humanity that just went through, we now know there are good aliens in addition to bad. Welcome to the party. We'll see you at the, at the barbecue and see what you bring. And like that would, there's still the fear of, how refugees are treated currently today. So having them shapeshift is, I understand the value of that, but letting people be free so they can live their lives is what we aspire to. And that's the missed opportunity in the story that, you could have had Skrulls in Albuquerque, and everyone be hunky-dory and happy.
Hey, there's a lot of people needed to work in the food industry, right? We need waiters all the time. Everyone's gone to a restaurant now. I don't know what's happened post-pandemic that there's nobody to go work in these places. So Skrulls, come on down.
Well, and it's just, you look at, even if it's like, wow, we got a super fun site no one can live in anymore. You guys apparently are cool with this. Welcome. Like this is, you can start building houses because we can't live there anymore.
Or let them run all the nuclear power plants.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's all of these places where they could go, or, the issue of like, could Mars work for them? Like there's, like radiation could be an issue for us, but could we terraform or, any of the Jehovian moons or moons around Saturn? It's like Io's hell for us. Would they be okay? So
Well, I guess the question, are we the Earth holding them hostage? Are we preventing them from leaving? I mean, that's not explained. I mean, why are they still here? Wasn't it their ship in the first place that was up there? So why don't you just leave?
Yeah, it's just, well, you had the Kree Captain Marvel, her ship up there, but I don't remember if that was lost or not in the Captain Marvel film. Alternatively, when they start building the giant space station, who's building that? Is that a Skrull human compact working together? Also, when did they start building that? Would be a good question. Is that post 2012 that they, or is it post Endgame where they realize we need to have a defense system in orbit to protect us? What's the game plan here? So maybe we're just deep in the weeds, because when you think about the contracts that need to be put into place, and if we're able to build a space battle station, like we're way beyond ISS at that point. So like, NASA is clearly well funded, and you think we would know what's on Europa, like we would have been there. So or any of the, Neptune, there's signs that Neptune is different than we thought it was. Like, so you think we'd be deep exploring our own solar system? But again, that's just not addressed. And maybe I'm just leaning in too far, but so with that, any other thoughts on this episode? Because I mean, we end with Maria Hill getting shot. We also end with dirty bombs going off in Moscow, which really don't seem that big. I was expecting more bang, but that could really ruin living in Moscow. And if anyone's seen Chernobyl, it doesn't bode well.
Yeah, I was surprised that Agent Hill met her end sort of so abruptly and unexpectedly at the end of the episode. She's been around the MCU for a long time.
Yeah,
But
since
I'm
it
trying to
ended.
think, did we see her die?
I mean, Agents. I mean, the whole Agents of Shield series was based on the fact that Agent
Olsen,
Coulson, yes, who died very definitively in the Avengers movie, did not in fact die. So chances are not zero that she
Yeah.
will come back.
Some skull technology, scroll
Totally.
technology will bring her back, and
Yeah.
we'll see. But again, like, I enjoyed the first episode. I did not necessarily say that at the end of each first episode of some of the other series, especially She-Hulk, which had lots of cool legal commentary that we could talk about, given she's a lawyer. Maybe that made it worse. But I'm looking forward to the next episode, and I'm waiting to see where the storyline goes. I mean, they're just making it more difficult. Like like we were talking about in the beginning, how are other countries not going to be involved now? Is it just going to be the US and Skrulls, which I just start to find unrealistic when it's done on foreign soil, especially a country like Russia. I mean, if it was in some real third world country that doesn't have its act together, sure, but not Russia.
no, they have an active spy network. Like we've known this for a long time. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see the Brits, but any good spy story is going to have multiple agencies at play, and maybe they'll lean into that, because again, this felt like an old spy show, not again kind of that Man from Uncle type, mystery of what's happening. So I'm cautiously optimistic, because there was, again, Falcon and Winter Soldier, I had issues of like, that doesn't make sense. She-Hulk that's not how the law works, even though I was there up late every night to watch it. This felt good. Like this was good to talk about and to see. So with that, I can say that all three of us will be at Comic-Con. I cannot say anything else about panel times, what we're talking about, but you'll have multiple opportunities to see all of us. And we are very excited to be going and to actually hang out in person. Even though it's much easier for Stephen and I to do that, way harder for Mark and I to do that. So,
But still well worth it.
Can't wait. It's going to be so much fun to actually see each other again. So with that, everyone, we will be back. Wherever you're listening, please leave a review. And wherever you are, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Take care now.